place to live, guys. And we've been learning so much about Missouri history.
Yeah, maybe we should go back in time.
Come with us.
The Native Americans lived off of the land. The land of Missouri was a good place for many tribes to live. There were animals to hunt for food, fur, and clothes. They could fish the many rivers and use the trees to build homes and tools. There were 7 main Native American tribes of Missouri. And one tribe called the Oto were nomadic. They lived in teepees and used bull boats to get around. Another tribe called the Iowa used boats as well for transportation. The tribe near Kansas City was called the Missouri tribe. There were also the Illini, the Quapaw, and the Chickasaw. The last tribe was the Osage, or water people.
Let's go see how the explorers discovered Missouri.
The kings and queens of Europe wanted spices, silks, and other goods from Asia, but the route was too long and dangerous. So the kings and queens sent explorers to find an easier and shorter route to Asia. However, the explorers that they sent found new land that is now America.
Christopher Columbus sailed for Spain to find a quicker route to Asia. He thought he was in Asia, but he found the Americas. He claimed the new land for Spain.
Amerigo Vespucci was an explorer who sailed for Spain. He was looking for a faster route to Asia. He did not find Asia. He found what is now South America. He determined the land he found was not Asia. It was an entirely new piece of land. He claimed this land for Spain.
Jacques Cartier was an explorer for France. France was also looking for a faster route to Asia. France sent Jacques to find a better route. While he didn't find a quicker route, he found a new land and claimed this land for France, naming it New France.
John Cabot explored for England. He traveled and explored parts of Canada and New England, which is now the states of Connecticut, Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Vermont. This led us closer to Missouri.
Now let's take a trip up the Mississippi River.
Robert de La Salle was a French explorer and fur trader in North America. Explorers at this time were looking for a fast route across North America to Asia. He explored the Great Lakes region of the United States and Canada. He also explored the Mississippi River and determined what it led. In exploring the Mississippi River, he explored parts of Missouri.
Marquette and Joliet were the first European men to explore the Mississippi River. They explored for France. They started a 4-year voyage that led them deep down the Mississippi River. They also wanted to explore new land.
Next, let's explore how our nation was born.
When the new land was discovered, many Europeans started coming to the Americas. The Pilgrims were one group of people who came to the Americas. The Pilgrims boarded a ship, the Mayflower, sailed to North America. They founded Plymouth colony, which is now Massachusetts.
They took over the Native Americans' land, which wasn't fair to the Native Americans. Eventually, the Pilgrims and other Europeans began settling, establishing towns in the 13 colonies. The population began to rapidly increase. Soon, the triangular trade began. The triangular trade was the three-legged route that made up the Atlantic slave trade.
Farmers in America wanted slaves to work for them for free. So Arabs sent ships filled with goods to West Africa. In Africa, they traded the goods for enslaved people. Next, they would sail to the Americas and sell the slaves to plantation owners. They would then take the money they got from selling the slaves and return to Europe to buy more goods. This pattern repeated for hundreds of years, bringing thousands of enslaved people to the Americas.
Have you ever wondered about the importance of the Louisiana Purchase? Let's go find out.
New Orleans was one of the most important port cities in the United States. The city alone allowed access to the Mississippi River. The Mississippi River was used to transport goods and crops and from the middle of the United States to other countries. The port was an important route for transportation and trading.
While they allowed the United
However,
States to use the
port
President
was
Thomas Jefferson was
controlled
worried that they
by
would eventually not allow
Spain
us to
and
use the
then
Mississippi
later
River or the
by
port of New
France.
Orleans. This would cause major problems for the United States. So Thomas Jefferson sent Robert Livingston and James Monroe to buy Florida and the port of New Orleans. President Jefferson secretly advised Livingston and Monroe to offer France as much as $10 million for the land. France was in desperate need of money at this time, so they made the deal even better. In the end, the United States paid $15 million, but more than what they wanted. In the purchase, the United States doubled in size and had ownership of the Mississippi River and the port of New Orleans.
Thomas Jefferson wanted to explore the newly purchased land of the Louisiana Territory, so he hired Meriwether Lewis and William Clark to go explore the land. Lewis, Clark, and their team of 36 men explored from St. Louis, Missouri, all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Their job was to document the land and make maps and write journals. While they were on the journey, they saw many Native Americans, tribes, and new animals.
Lewis and Clark were thrilled to explore the new land, but they didn't know the Native American language, and it was hard to communicate. So they hired Sacagawea to be a translator. Young Sacagawea had a rough life by being captured by the Hadassi tribe and being sold and married to a French-Canadian man named Toussaint Charbonneau. Together they had a baby named John Baptist Charbonneau, or Little Pump. Sacagawea and Little Pump traveled with the explorers as a translator and guide all the way to the Pacific Ocean. During her journey, she found her birth tribe, the Shoshone Native Americans. However, Sacagawea decided to continue on with the exploration.
Ever heard about the westward expansion? Let's go learn.
In the 1800s, thousands of U.S. pioneers traveled west on the Oregon Trail. Life on the Oregon Trail was not easy, it was hard. There were lots of diseases and illnesses, with few hospitals to stop for help. Many people died along the way. The journey was about 2,000 miles long. The kids and moms had to walk most of the way. They traveled in covered wagons pulled by horses, mules, or oxen, which weren't that fast. The top of the covered wagon was made of canvas or cotton. It was used to protect the pioneers and their supplies from the weather. Pioneers carried all of their belongings in their wagon. The pioneers traveled in groups called trains. It was also hard because they only had saved up so much money for the trip, so they had to spend their money wisely. After almost a year on the trail, pioneers finally reached open land and began starting a new life.
In the early years of the Oregon Trail, Native Americans rarely attacked big wagon trains. Most Native Americans were helpful to the pioneers.
Native Americans would round up lost cattle, get wagons unstuck, and save drowning pioneers.
Pioneers would trade coffee, tobacco, rifles, or clothing in exchange for other goods or services. Everyone mostly got along.
However, within a few years, the pioneers had overgrazed the prairies, burned all the available firewood, and used too many resources. Native Americans and pioneers began fighting with each other. The pioneers kept taking all their resources, which wasn't fair to the Native Americans. This caused many battles and deaths.
The Native Americans wanted to live in peace with the settlers. But the pioneers kept taking more and more land. Wars broke out and continued for years. In the end, the United States forced the Native Americans to relocate to reservations.
Over time, the United States of America continued to grow. Missouri wanted to become an official state. At the time, there were 11 free states and 11 slave states. The southern states wanted Missouri to become a slave state. The northern states wanted Missouri to become a free state.
To keep the peace, the Missouri Compromise allowed Missouri to enter as a slave state and Maine to enter as a free state. The Missouri Compromise also stated that the future, any states above the 36 degrees, 30 minutes latitude line would be prohibit slavery, and any state below that line could be a slave state.
Next, let's learn about slavery in Missouri history.
Southern farmers wanted workers to work on their farm for free. They wanted slaves because it would save them a lot of money. It was a big adventure, and they could become very wealthy if slaves worked on their land. But a slave's life was really hard. Slaves typically African Americans were owned by white men. Slaves weren't allowed to do what they wanted. They had to obey their owners. Slaves were treated horribly, but they were hardworking and courageous. Slaves wanted to escape, but if they got caught, they might get beaten or killed.
Abolitionists were people who wanted to end slavery. So they made an underground railroad, which was actually not a real railroad, and it helped slaves escape. Their plans had to be kept secret because it was against the law to free a slave. Leaders of the Underground Railroad had to sneak slaves from the South all the way to a free state in the North.
One leader of the Underground Railroad was Harriet Tubman. Harriet was born a slave and wanted freedom. One day she escaped freedom. Then she went to work on the Underground Railroad, helping many other slaves escape.
Frederick Douglass also worked to end slavery. He was born a slave, but he escaped to freedom by disguising himself as a sailor. Once he was living in a free state, he spent the rest of his life working, speaking, and writing for civil rights.
Why don't we learn about how the Civil War started?
At this point in time, the United States was greatly divided.
In the 1850s, the Fugitive Slave Act was passed. This law was terrible but true. It stated if a slave escaped to a free state and became a free man or woman, their owners could still come find them and force them back into slavery. This law was very unpopular in the North, but very popular in the South.
On May 30th, 1854, the Kansas-Nebraska Act was passed by the United States Congress. It allowed people in the territories of Kansas and Nebraska to decide for themselves whether or not to allow slavery within their borders. The act served to repeal the Missouri Compromise. People not living in Nebraska and Kansas began moving to the area to influence the vote on slavery. This led to a lot of fighting in Kansas and Missouri. This moment in history is known as Bleeding Kansas.
Then in 1857, a black man named Dred Scott sued his owner for his freedom. He was tired of being ordered and bossed around. He said that because he lived in a free state, he should be a free man. His case went all the way to the Supreme Court. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court ruled that against Scott. Not only did they say he was still a slave, they also stated that all black Africans were not citizens and had no rights under the law.
Abraham Lincoln was elected president in 1860. Abraham Lincoln did not believe in slavery and thought they should be free. So Abraham Lincoln wrote the Emancipation The South did not like this decision. It led to the Civil War. The Southern states were unhappy with the decisions political leaders were making, so they separated from the United States and formed a Confederacy States of America. They broke away from the United States and began to establish their own government and laws. A few months later, the Civil War officially began.
Missouri was in the Civil War. Let's find out why.
The Union wanted no slaves, but the Confederacy wanted slaves. The border states were states that allowed slaves but stayed a part of the Union. Missouri was a border state.
It was claimed by both the Union and the Confederacy. At this time, Missouri even set up two separate governments. They sent representatives to both the United States Congress and the Confederate Congress. They sent representatives that lived in Missouri were very divided. Sometimes brothers from the same family would fight against each other in the Civil War. About 110,000 Missouri men fought for the Union, and about 40,000 Missouri men fought with the Confederate Army.
In 1861, the Civil War began. There were many battles, including the Battle of Bull Run and the Battle of Gettysburg. There were also many battles fought in Missouri, including the Battle of Lexington, the Battle of Westport, and the Battle of Mount Zion Church. In fact, during the Civil War, William Jewell College was used as a hospital and a lookout point.
Missouri had a lot of resources that were used in the Civil War. Missouri was rich in corn, pork, and grain. Missouri had a lot of mules and horses. Iron and lead were used to make weapons. Kansas City and St. Louis were able to make clothes, boats, and muskets. Today, Missouri is full of important people in important places. Missouri is a Midwest state covered with grassy plains, forests, and wide rivers, and amazing lakes and Ozark Mountains. It is home to art museums, jazz clubs, delicious barbecues, and the Gateway Arch. It is also home to the Kansas City Chiefs and the St. Louis Cardinals, the Kansas City Royals, and the St. Louis Blues, and Sporting KC. Whether you are interested in sports, history, or culture, Missouri has something for everyone.
There are many famous Missourians that have made a difference in our world.
Some famous Missourians are Walt Disney, Langston Hughes, Josephine Baker, Scott Joplin, J.C. Penney, White Cloud, Daniel Boone, and George Washington Carver. Some are remembered for their courage and kindness.
Others are remembered for their talent and leadership.
That was fun. We hope you enjoyed the story of Missouri. Thanks for watching.